Hey everybody, Glenn Hess here with Hess Motorsports. We're going to do an install video today on a Polaris XP 1000. Would be the same for a turbo or XP 900. Pretty much stuff the same. A few things a little bit different. Even your Ace or some of those are kind of similar guidelines on installing these. But anyhow, we're going to do it with our new 2-to-1 version 2 steering quickener from Hess Motorsports. As you notice, it may be a little different than what you've seen our previous units. This is the version V2 version. It is a complete machined housing now with gears and stuff in it. And what we did to increase everything, make everything better, was we've gone to larger shaft diameters and larger bearings. Everybody knows larger bearings makes things turn easier. And with doing all those things, we're able to have a little bit better tolerances. And we also have integrated our own shaft on the end that accepts our disconnect right now. You also can get this where it accepts your stock steering wheel. If you don't want the extra expense and don't care for a disconnect, I totally understand. It just makes it a little more economical. That's one reason we have it the other way, to try to make it more affordable for more people. We'd really like to see everybody have our products, but we know cost is always a factor. But this unit here is totally machined here in the shop. Bigger bearings, bigger shafts, like I said, and the real purpose of that is the old units were very difficult to turn by hand. A lot of times I'd take a vice grip and spin them. As you can see, I'm turning this quite easily. They're probably a good 20, maybe 25% easier to turn than the previous units. Difficulty to turn is what most people is their biggest complaint about steering quickeners. The great advantage of steering quickeners is you only have to turn it half as much. So when you're in a fast pace, and it doesn't matter whether you're sand dune riding or if you're going in the woods riding, fast trail riding, short course racing or whatever, when you're working that thing and you're doing this hand over hand motion, it is so physically tiring. And plus, if you're in a drift and the car tries to stand up on you or catch, you can't work the wheel fast enough to set the car back down, and it usually causes you to roll over. At least with a steering quickener, most of your steering is this to this, because from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock is all the way right, and come back past 12 and go to here to 6 o'clock again is all the way left. So most of your motion is this scenario. So therefore you greatly have a lot more control of the car. You come into a turn and you work a little bit, and maybe you have to slip it through your fingers a little, but not very much, because you don't go lock to lock that often. Or if you do, it's just so easy to just grab it and whip it instead of having to grab another handful and get it again. We have some videos on there that show some comparison of the 2-to-1 versus the 1.5 versus stock, and real time it makes you faster. But the other things, like I said, bigger bearings is in here. What happened a lot to make everything better. This will be the steering shaft you'll be receiving along with it. The silver chrome shiny end goes on our shaft here. When you get these, a lot of times they might be a little stiff going on. If you're installing it and it gets about to here and don't want to go, something feels wrong, make sure that this is backed out far enough first of all. And then if you have to, you may set it down and just give it a slight tap. Once it goes, it should move on and off freely. Sometimes they come with a little burr in there, and so that's what it takes to knock that out. The next thing I want you to like, and then this end here is the factory Polaris style end. We have an 8mm hole through our U-joint. You might notice the one you take off has a 6mm hole through it. Have people call quite often concerned that they need to put a bigger bolt in there or not. Reuse your 6mm bolt. If Polaris thought it was big enough, it's big enough to do the job. We just went for the bigger size hole here to give us a little bit more on and off adjustment. Same way here, just because these cars vary a little bit. As everything's all bolted together, it all varies just a little bit, and it just gives us a little adjustability to fit those needs. You do still get your factory tilt. If you don't have factory tilt, which some people don't, you can set your clevis in here at whatever length you need it to be, and it still works because this is all in the same relationship. You still get the same amount of tilt as factory. The only thing you may run into that we've seen, if you're all the way up, sometimes U-joint binds just a little bit, but nobody drives with it all the way up in the trucker position. This new shaft, like I said, will accept the disconnect now. This disconnect is master splined. If you'll take a note of it, it's got one spline that's thicker than the others, and if you look at our steering disconnect, it has one that's bigger than the others also. You're going to want to put this together when you're doing all this. Put the disconnect with the bigger shaft spline to the top, and it'll be at 12 o'clock, and you'll center your steering wheel at 12 o'clock as well. And so there it goes on. It allows you to have just a couple of lengths. You can gain just a little bit of length, up to a ½ inch more if you want it closer to you, and that's as far as it gets away from you. With this disconnect, you can use one of our Hess Motorsports steering wheels, our signature green color. We love it. We hope everybody else does. But and then you'll want to put the steering wheel with the master key spline at 12 o'clock position when you bolt it all together. We have these threaded. This is 1/4 bolts, very common, easy to get. If you lose one or something happens, we thread those. You'll go through the cap, through the Hess Motorsports cap, through the steering wheel, thread into here with I said, like at 12 o'clock. And then after you get all of them tight, we have jam nuts for the back side because we don't want anything coming loose. Previous adapters and previous steering wheel setups of ours and everybody's out there, because we were using other people's stuff at one time. They typically had 5mm bolts in there with little Allen heads, and you just couldn't get them tight enough, and they had a tendency not to stay tight. And so we found this setup works the best because you're squeezing the steering wheel down a lot tighter. We don't have any of these coming loose or anything. So with all that said, I'm going to try to do a little bit of telling you what we're taking apart here to get the unit out of the car so we can perform the stuff. First thing we'll need to do is we'll need to get a 25 Torx, and we're going to take the cover off the power steering unit. On the power steering cover here, it's just a fiberglass kind of plastic cover with 2 bolts on the bottom that are 25mm Torx. Just loosen them up. They're little short bolts. Thread them off. Don't drop them in the floorboard, because if you got a skid plate, they might get lost between the skid plate and the floorboard. They thread right out pretty easy. I could be using power tools on all this, but not everybody has them. So we just do it the old-fashioned way. Takes a second longer, but it gives you more time to realize and think about what I'm doing. That cover comes off, set it over to the side. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take loose the bolt and nut that hold the U-joint onto the factory power steering unit so we can take that apart. Right now is a good time to do it. You'll want to turn your steering wheel to where the nut faces the bottom, as you can see how I have it here. Then you can get the wrench on the top side and take the nut loose and take that completely off. So I'm working it off here. It is a lock style nut, so it'll turn hard coming off all the way. It's a nylon knock. Then the easiest thing is to turn the steering wheel around again so you can pull the bolt out the bottom. And this one actually has an 8mm bolt in it. We're going to put that up here because you will reuse that bolt. Now, the next thing you want to make sure is put your steering wheel back in the straight forward position after you have that out of there. You want your wheels facing straight forward, and you want your steering wheel set up to be clocked at 12 o'clock. The next thing we're going to do is remove the hood so we can get access to the top of the power steering unit. And so we need to do that. That comes off by hand. You'll take these 2 bolts, 2 Torx bolts out here that are 40mm Torx. We're going to remove these 2 bolts here. That will allow us to take the gauge cluster assembly and slide it back to get access to the bolts that hold the tilt column assembly in there. They're 40mm Torx, so just pull them off. And like I said before, you can use impacts if you want to. Typically take this and just give it a little push back and it'll unclip just like it just did. You can go inside the car now and usually pull it back a little bit more, and it may not work. There we go. And now what we need to do is get access to these, and why we did that was get access to these 2 bolts here. They're 50mm bolt and nut setup, and they come in through the whole tilt assembly to hold everything in place. So we're going to get where we get those off now. So we need a 15mm deep socket. and a wrench, and this sometimes works really good with two people because you can get the, and this one actually works better with an impact if you can, because you can spin it off. Let me get a gun real quick. There's one of them coming off. Uh-oh, I dropped the bolt. Hope I can find it back for the nut. Okay, get on the other one. Be a little bit easier to do if the windshield wasn't in the way, but we're working with it. We got two 15mm nuts that just came out of there. I've already pushed one of the bolts out. All right, these are the bolts that hold your tilt assembly in the car. Here's one, I'm fixing to remove the other. When I pull the other one out, you should be able to just pull everything. You gotta work it a little bit sometimes. Wiggle it around, pull it out. There it is. Okay, now the whole unit wants to come out, and the power steering shaft sometimes will be a little bit booger to get off. This one was really tight. As you can see, it was pretty kind of rusted on there. This is a early 15 model car. This guy's got a lot of time on it, been rode a lot. This is what we were after, guys. And take note, I've spun it upside down by accident. This is how it sets in the car. Like so. The drive shaft goes over to your right side of your adjustment. In fact, if you notice, this is a little bit tapered out for it compared to the other side. There's not quite as much metal there. And it goes on the power steering unit in that fashion. And as you can see, that's awful rusty in there. That's why I had difficulty getting it off. Might spray a little WD-40 on them ahead of time, but usually they come right off. Okay. All right, I've gone purposely and turned the wheels on this unit so you can see that our shop cat just had to get in the middle of everything. I've turned the steering a half a turn just to show you. We put a black magic marker on the top here, but this is what I'm talking about, this being master spline. If you notice, this spline here is smashed flat. It should be, and I said 12 o'clock a while ago, and I mean it should be facing up here. 12 o'clock to the square. That would be the proper position. This shaft was corroded on there, and I had to turn it to 6 o'clock and drive a screwdriver between the split to get it to loosen up to come off because it was tight, it was rusted on. So I'm going to turn this back to the top, and that's what I was trying to tell you about. It's critical about everything being clocked when you put it back together. So I'll move this back to the top. This is when I said make note of what position the shaft is in when you put it together, because you'll have to go back in the same spot or it'll only go halfway on and it'll stop and you just think you're just in a bind, and you're not. You're bottomed out against this master spline right here. That's what I want to show you. So we'll put it back to the position and go back to the rest of it. All right, we've got the unit out of the car now, or razor. This is usually held on with a 1/4-inch steel pop rivet. This guy wrecked this car and has already changed this out for whatever reason, and he's got bolts in here. I don't know exactly why or whatever, but normally there'd be a 1/4-inch pop rivet here. You knock the center out of the pop rivet with a small punch and you drill the rivet off. Be careful when you're drilling it off. This is the piece that's going back in the car. You do see this part sticking out of the dash. So be careful when you're drilling the rivet out. And just drill it out a 1/4-inch. Like I said, knock the middle out, which is about an 1/8-inch pin, and then drill the rivet out with a 1/4-inch. And it works best to kind of wallow as you're drilling, so you actually drill the mushroomed head off. Once you get it out, turn around, do the other side, and like I said, this has a bolt in it, which we've already taken the other side off just for demonstration. But now, before I move that bolt, I'm going to take loose the adjustment shaft from the tilt mechanism from up here, because we won't be using it on the steering wheel portion anymore. So we just break the jam nut loose and thread it off. You will reuse this bolt, so don't discard it. You'll need it to put it back together. As you noticed, it is a shoulder style bolt. In our Quickener, we have this, goes down through here, and it's shouldered just so it works perfect. Anyway, so put that aside till a little bit later. And I'm going to pull this bolt out, take this off. Now, take this whole section here, take this section here, put it in a box, maybe the box I sent you or whatever, and set it to the side. You can put it on your shelf. You might want to take this Quickener unit out of the car if you get another car and put it back stock. You can bolt it back together here just like the factory. Now, what we've got here is the unit that goes in the car that holds everything. On the earlier model cars, the 14 cars and the 13s and some of the other ones, this was made a little bit differently. They used to have 10mm bolts with nuts on the side, and then they had 10mm bolts with washers made onto them, a couple different setups, but they would bolt in from each side. As you see now, they've gone with a long bolt all the way through with a pipe here, so when they crush it, tighten it down, it all clamps down good and tight. It's a lot better design than what it had before, because they had little 6mm bolts on the early models. All right, so now what we've got is this all apart. You'll need to take a 1/2-inch drill. We've got one right here already chucked up, and drill this out. You see there's a little bushing there. Actually, he's still got part of the pop rivet in there. There we go. This is high tensile steel. It doesn't drill very good. If you have a vise available, you can hold it in a vise where you can push a little harder. So I'm just kind of taking my time with it. And my truck's getting bad. All right. As you notice, I went through and I didn't really go and try to waller it or anything. Now this is what's important. If you have a vise, you can do this real easy, but I have to take this bushing off of here now. And as you notice, our unit is a little bit narrower than the housing. The reason for that is the 900 XP and the 800s, which we originally designed this for, was a narrower width. Whenever the 1000 XP came out, we didn't want to redesign everything and exclude and have to have more models, so we made it, kept the same width, and we made a little spacer here. The 900 XPs, if any of you guys ever had one, actually have the bolt that comes through and bolts right into our bolt-up setup here. Works really well. So we're going to take this off like we talked about. Take the jam nut off, thread it off. We'll come from the inside to the outside. What you'll want to do now is take your vice grip. If you have a vise, it works really well. But if you don't and you have a vice grip, you can do it like so. And you keep pushing it through the hole, little by little, until it's pushing. And it works good if you have two vice grips, because you can get one on each side. And you'll want to get the bushing pushed all the way through the hole. And that's what I was talking about. See how it's sticking through just a little bit? Now when you take the other one and push it through the other side, and like I said, almost everybody's got vice grips. I guess you could do it with pliers if you had to, but it might be a little more difficult. Get it started, then we're ready to put, which I've already got the U-joint on here, as you can see, and I left this loose just enough so it don't come off, but so we have some movement. Now we have to remember that the unit goes in the car as so. So and our drive shaft has to go to the right. Remember we talked about that earlier. So we're going to spread this apart a little bit. Slip this down in here. It's kind of a snug fit, but that's what we want. We put the bushing here that's in between here. We pressed it into the steel housing with the big portion of the bushing goes toward the quickener. The smaller part goes through the 1/2-inch hole that you just drilled. We pushed it through there with vice grip. As you see, it has a little bit of a gap. That's to allow this to flex and move just slightly. When you put the washer on, thread the bolt through it. We started the nut on the back side when we got through just a little bit. It's a little more difficult to start. You can see if it was threaded all the way in as it is now, it'd be hard to start that nut. And this nut is just a jam nut to make things stronger and also to double protect that this doesn't come loose. We recommend putting blue Loctite on these 2 jam nuts before you jam those. But you will run these bolts up tight into the housing. The housing is threaded itself. So jam them tight and then jam the nuts. So we're going to get some blue Loctite for that right now. Next thing you're going to want to do is put this little bushing bolt in here, shouldered bolt. Put it together, thread it through. It's a little bit difficult sometimes. They're a little snug. Our piece is threaded, as you can see, because it's threading in. Tighten it up. You'll notice it's going to be flush on this side. Don't over tighten it. You got a couple of threads there. We usually still go a little bit drop of Loctite on it since you got the factory nut. Oh, too much, but anyway. And just gently run that on there a little bit. Just barely tighten it because it'll strip on you. And it is not a 10 millimeter. There is it? Nope. It's 11 millimeter. I got one right here. I got one. So just tighten it just a little bit. Kind of act like a jam nut, and there it is. All right, we've got all this together now, and in some units, it's easy to put it together as an assembly like this, like we talked about, especially if you're having the stock steering wheel, because it's not as important to getting everything clocked in time. Because with your stock steering wheel, you can pull it off one spline and keep moving till you get everything exact. This, being master splined, won't allow us to do that. So we're going to go ahead and take it apart here and put this on down here where it has to go. Then put the unit in the car. This having to be master spline, this notch here needs to be up at the top like we talked about, and it should go just easy as can be when you're in the right position, and which it did. See, it fell down real easy. If it won't go all the way down, you're not in the right notch. Don't drive it on whatever you do. As you can see, this here is the master spline portion of it. And as I showed you on the shaft earlier, when we had it at the bottom, but it needs to be at top, and the wheels are straight forward. We're going to put this at 12 o'clock, and we're going to attempt to get our steering shaft on down here at 12 o'clock as well. And you saw I just slipped that on. I'm off just a little bit. It turned to me a hair as it came on, so I'm going to move one notch over. There we go. Note, I'm at 12 o'clock. It just takes a little fumbling around with it to get it where you need it to be. Now I'm going to take my long bolt and attempt to get it put back in place. There, we got one bolt through. And the other bolt is right. Where'd it go? Did it go to the floorboard? It's in the floorboard. Now we got all our bolts started. Go ahead and start those. They are locking nuts, so you really don't have to have any lube on them or any Loctite on them. I'm putting the bolt through the lower power steering U-joint at this moment. It's got some movement on it, that's why that has that bigger bolt. Now I'm going to I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to get this Allen bolt turned to the side here where I can get to it. Right there. I want to make sure that it's in the center of this shaft here. And remember me talking a while ago about Loctite for that one. I'm going to tighten up my set screw that's underneath here. Get it good and tight, got blue Loctite on it. All right, I'm tightening the lower U-joint right now, the U-joint that's on the power steering unit. I'm holding up on the U-joint as I tighten it, so everything, the U-joints are pushing against each other. You may have to turn stuff with the key to put it in a position where you can get to it to tighten it. All right, got that. I'm tightening the two 15mm bolts up that hold the main unit in the car now. Making sure they're good and tight. All right, next thing we're gonna do is push this back forward, get this kind of back in line. The windshield's making it a little more difficult, but still not undoable. There, snapped on, just pops in place. All right, next thing we're gonna do for right here, while we're sitting in here so comfortable, we're gonna take the steering wheel. Now I've made sure that my master spline is at 12 o'clock, my Quickener's at 12 o'clock, and so is my main shaft. You may not be able to get exact 12 o'clock, you may be off just a fraction, but that's as close as it's gonna get. If you need it more refined than that, you'll have to adjust your tie rods just slightly. So now we're gonna take the steering wheel and the steering wheel cap, and we're gonna put a bolt through it. Making sure you got your HM right side up. Start this in there. Get another one, get it started. As I mentioned earlier, we've gone to a little bit bigger bolt setup here than what most manufacturers are using. The 5mm bolts that they used to come with just didn't seem like they was quite enough, and they didn't have a jam nut on the back side either. And you're really torquing around on this steering wheel setup when you're in the car, so it takes a beating. So we just felt like it was better off going to next size bigger bolts and then putting a jam nut on the back side as well. And if you like, you can Loctite all this. Not a bad idea. Probably should have. I just got carried away and didn't do it. Probably recommend that you do though. All right, everything's put back together now. Tighten. I mean, you need to put the rest of the car together, but all the Quickeners in. I've tightened all this up. Make sure you work these around and get them good and tight. And as you can see now, that's all the way to the left. That's all the way to the right. So that's what a 2-to-1 steering does. And if you, like I said earlier, if you can't get it clocked exactly, you may have to adjust your toe in just a little bit to get your steering exactly centered going down the road. But that's the way to go, and you still have your adjustment. You need to put your cover back on your power steering and bolt your dash stuff back down. You can have it. I'm sweating like a pig because it's hot here in Texas. And thank you very much for buying our products and watching our install videos. Hess Motorsports, thank you.